So, hello and welcome in the Museum of Occupations and Freedom, Vabamu. And I cannot be more happy that this kind of event happens here. In our museum, we are thinking about freedom and lack of freedom during the Soviet time as two sides of the same coin. So we have to remember what happened in the past, but actually we even more have to think what's happening at the moment, and talking about how we are leading our countries is a very crucial part of that. So hello everybody again, and I hope that later on we have time to you have time to visit the museum, or not today, then in some other times. You're always welcome to come again. But here, I think we all want to know and hear more. And now I'm giving word to Teele to introduce what's going to happen tonight.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Open Governance Evening. I'm Teele Pehk, Open Government Advocate in Estonia. And I'm really glad on behalf of the Civil Society Roundtable of the Open Governance, I'm glad to welcome you here. I'm very, very honored to welcome the high delegation of the Global Open Government Partnership here, because in the times when populism is spreading, disinformation is spreading, civic space is shrinking in so many countries, it's so important to talk also about the ideal democracy, or share the visions about democracy, and exchange ideas, even if they are totally crazy or out of space. And I'm so happy to do it here at the Museum of Occupations and Freedom, because this could be the safe space for these kind of discussions and events. So let's hope this is just the first democracy club in Tallinn or in Estonia. There could be many spaces, actually. So what is happening tonight is that we have around half an hour presentation by Sanjay Pradhan. I will introduce him shortly. Then there will be a discussion led by Riina Raudne. I will also introduce her later on. And then, with your participation, we can share these visions and crazy ideas, or not crazy ideas. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you will participate actively, and the event is also live streamed on Delfi TV, so hi to all the watchers and listeners. If anybody wants to ask something in Estonian, that's also fine, but there's no translation guarantees. So without further ado, Sanjay Pradhan, the clicker is yours, but short introduction. You are the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Open Government Partnership, and you have worked at the World Bank with issues like anti-corruption and open governance and civic engagement for more than 30 years, also serving as the Vice President of the World Bank. And now, at your current position, you are negotiating and leading dialogues with the heads of states and civil society members. So we're very happy to have you here. Please take the sticker. And we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. Thanks very much, Teele, for that lovely introduction. And thanks so much to the Vabamu Museum. It's such a perfect setting. It's beautiful. Thank you so much. And thanks so much to the Civil Society Roundtable of the Estonia Open Government Partnership for inviting us here. Really, such a pleasure to be here. So let us embark on a journey together. A journey of hope at a time of threat, of opportunity at a time of challenges, of democratic renewal at a time of unprecedented threats to democracy. And let us begin our journey with Election Day in Afghanistan. So it was 11 in the morning on October 20th last year, when a local polling station in Kabul, Afghanistan, was bombed. the ambulances came and took away the dead and the wounded. But amazingly, that very day, Afghans, many of them poor and destitute, returned to the same polling station the same day, insisted on reopening the voting, waited in long lines till late in the evening, including the disabled, to cast their vote. It's truly moving to see this depth of passion of citizens to elect a government that serves their needs. The promise of democracy has indeed been defined by the ballot box, but far too often this promise has not translated into reality in people's daily lives. Today, even though citizens in a majority of countries are electing their leaders through formal elections, citizen trust in democratic institutions has plummeted. In OECD countries, citizen trust in national governments stands at an alarmingly low rate of 45%. Globally, the Democracy Perception Index of 2018 finds that 64% of people living in democracies, 64% of people living in democracies feel that their elected government rarely or never acts in the public interest. Just think about that. In far too many countries, citizens perceive their elected governments to be disconnected and unresponsive to their needs or captured by special interests. This, in part, has fueled the rise of populist authoritarian leaders. From Hungary to Tanzania, Turkey, Russia, and beyond, including in established democracies, elected leaders are stoking the citizen distrust and adopting a widely spreading playbook of strongman tactics to attack oversight institutions, judiciaries, media, civil society. Populist leaders fanning the fears of the majority to attack minorities. And we are witnessing new digital threats to democracy, such as the spread of disinformation to manipulate public opinions and external meddling in elections. Now, amidst all these threats, I want to instead talk to you about an emerging movement, the Open Government Partnership, or OGP, which seeks to chart a more hopeful alternative of renewing and reinvigorating democracy. So it was 2011 when 8 heads of states and 9 civil society leaders got together at the UN General Assembly to forge OGP, a new partnership to amplify citizen voice and oversight in governance. Estonia was one of the first countries to join the partnership. The spirit behind the partnership, which was articulated by one of the founders, former US President Obama, was to ensure that government truly serves its citizens rather than itself. It is an idea at once simple yet spectacular, that citizens should have a say in decisions that impact them, that this exercise of democracy must not be limited to the ballot box, but rather practiced every day by citizens shaping policies and services that impact their lives. Because this work is too important and too big to only be limited to a few people or only once in 4 or 5 years when we cast our precious vote. And so the idea is, for instance, that the Afghans who braved those bombs to cast their vote should continue to be empowered to shape and oversee government between and beyond elections to ensure that government delivers on their aspirations. We call this democracy beyond the ballot box. And to achieve this, OGP empowers 2 champions of citizen interests, reformers in government and civil society, who come together to co-create a 2-year action plan where government reformers publicly commit to open government to citizens, to make government more transparent, participatory, responsive to citizens, while citizens and citizen groups engage to shape and oversee government to ensure it responds to their needs. And there is accountability from OGP's independent reporting mechanism, which publicly assesses, did the government open up as it said it would? Now, in 8 years, 79 countries and a growing number of local governments have joined OGP, together representing more than 2 billion people, along with thousands of civil society organizations. And together, they have co-created more than 4,000 commitments in over 250 action plans. Estonia is presently implementing its 4th action plan and has begun the process of co-creating its 5th. So with this background, I want to share with you stories of courageous reformers and activists in OGP who are together advancing 5 frontiers of open government. Each of these frontiers represents an antidote, a more hopeful alternative to the threats of democracy we see in our world today. So the first frontier, at a time when citizens distrust government, which they find is disconnected and unresponsive to their needs, a set of OGP reformers and activists are instead empowering citizens with information and opportunity to shape policies that respond to their needs. So for this, I take you first to the United Kingdom, where shockingly, a public inquiry into the Bristol babies scandal revealed that the lives of 170 children at the Bristol Royal Infirmary could have been saved had they been operated elsewhere. This is for coronary heart disease, cardiac surgeries. In response, the government started to publish data, open data, on mortality rates from, what happened? Something went off. On mortality rates from surgeries in individual hospitals. This then empowered citizens. I think I've lost the connection. This then empowered citizens to make informed decisions about their babies, and it resulted in mortality rates for babies undergoing heart surgeries to be reduced by 21% to 33%, depending upon the kind of surgery. In each subsequent action plan of OGP, the UK has been publishing data on mortality rates from different types of medical procedures, empowering citizens and literally saving lives. I just shared with you the example of UK and how open data was helping empower citizens to make informed decisions about their babies, literally saving lives. But empowering citizens requires combining open data with the opportunity for citizens to participate. And in this area of citizen participation, Estonia is actually one of the pioneers through its deliberative policy making, the People's Assembly or the Ravakogu platform, starting in 2012-2013, which resulted in a major reform of political party financing and the public petition system, to more recent citizen assemblies, which have been on the future of aging, on shrinking populations, and on sustainable forestry. Elsewhere in the world, I take you to Madrid, Spain. You just have to visualize that I'm taking you there. So I take you to Madrid, Spain, where the local government resolved that citizens needed to continue to be in charge of governance between and beyond elections. So they built Decide Madrid. Decide Madrid is an online and offline platform through which citizens can petition government on issues that matter to them, and the government responds. Using its OGP action plan, the government set aside Okay. Using its OGP action plan, okay, so this is Estonia's Citizen Assembly. And so now we are back to Madrid. So using its OGP action plan, the government set aside 30 million euros, or 5% of the budget each year, for which citizens, it's participatory budgeting, citizens propose and fund on projects that respond to their needs, such as citywide recycling, more green parks, or clean energy. You know, with 400,000 registered users, Decide Madrid has grown almost as fast as Facebook in Madrid. And today is being emulated by 90 governments around the world, with Uruguay becoming the first OGP country to take it nationwide. In Mongolia, citizens were trained and mobilized to give feedback on vital services like health, education, and water, and then brought into a conversation, a dialogue with government to address service delivery gaps. The government then started responding to citizen feedback, and this resulted in a 28% improvement in citizen satisfaction in health. I cite these examples also because as Estonia is embarking or accelerating its very exciting open local government program, there's a great opportunity to scale up systematically efforts like participatory budgeting or mobilizing citizen feedback to which government responds. So this was the first frontier. It was a little distracted by the visuals, but this is about empowering citizens with information and the opportunity to shape policies and services that respond to their needs. The second frontier is that at a time when minorities are feeling that they're under attack in populist regimes, one set of OGP countries are proactively empowering those who have traditionally been excluded from government, thereby showing how open government can be an inclusive alternative to the rise of populism today, where both the aggrieved majorities and the excluded minorities can both be empowered. So I take you to Costa Rica, where the indigenous community suffered from decades of exclusion and violent conflict over their homelands. But the OGP process empowered their network called RIBCA to join forces with a reformist vice minister, and they together institutionalized a consultation mechanism which built trust, abated conflict, and ushered vital investments in health and education. Germany is leveraging OGP to incentivize and foster the inclusion of migrants and refugees in local communities. In this regard, a broad priority of OGP's program of inclusion is to advance gender equality through open government approaches. Through OGP's Break the Roles campaign, 30 OGP members are taking concrete actions to empower women and gender groups, politically, as in Germany, monitoring the status of women in leadership positions in the public and private sectors, economic empowerment, as in Jalisco, Mexico, addressing the gender wage gap, socially, as in Buenos Aires, Argentina, empowering young women with information on sexual and reproductive health services, which were very hard in Argentina to access given prevailing cultural norms, enabling young women to take decisions that impact their lives. So this is the second frontier of inclusion of those who have traditionally been excluded. The third frontier is at a time when you're seeing citizen protests against inequality and corruption scandals that are rocking our world today. One group of OGP reformers and activists are instead empowering citizens to monitor and fight grand corruption and elite capture of the state. So for this, I take you to Ukraine. You're ready to go to Ukraine. So I take you to Ukraine in the aftermath of the Maidan Revolution. In the aftermath of the Maidan Revolution, young reformers and activists got together and said they wanted to tackle the capture of public procurement, including by oligarchs. So they built two platforms, ProZorro and DoZorro, leveraging OGP, wherein all public contracts, which were previously shrouded in secrecy and handed out in corrupt backroom deals, are now disclosed in open data standards so any citizen can search them and, importantly, report violations. Remember, this is quite important. Citizens can report violations with contract implementation, empowers citizens. Importantly, DoZorro is also using machine learning algorithms to flag tenders which have a high risk of corruption. Now get the results that resulted from this transparency and citizen participation in Ukraine. In 2 years, there have been 133,000 citizen visits on this portal. Citizens have reported 14,000 violations, of which half have been publicly resolved. The government reports saving $1 billion in expense savings and an additional $870 million as additional revenues from online auctions. 82% of the private sector report reduced corruption from the use of this platform. And there's been a 50% increase in businesses bidding for public contracts for the first time because they feel it's a level playing field. Galvanized by these results, more than 60 OGP governments have committed to open contracting. In another area of anti-corruption, the Panama Papers unmasked rampant money laundering, tax evasion, and stashing of stolen assets in anonymous companies. And so in response, over 20 OGP countries, including the UK, Latvia, Nigeria, Slovakia, are disclosing in an open format who really owns the companies and controls the companies. Once this is available in an open way, it has empowered citizens and activists to follow the money, report illicit funds, and hold the powerful accountable for paying taxes just as ordinary citizens do. We now need more OGP countries to do the same, and we urge EU countries to credibly implement the anti-money laundering directive that has provisions to end anonymous companies that hide financial crimes. I take you to Ireland, ready to go to Ireland. Take you to Ireland, where influence peddling and backroom deals contributed to their financial crisis. In response, the government, with citizen groups, started disclosing meetings and gifts between lobbyists and public officials on a public register which all lobbyists are required to join. By the end of last year, over 30,000 lobbying activities have been published, empowering citizens to monitor and curb influence peddling. So that was the third frontier. The fourth frontier, so the third frontier was an anti-corruption. The fourth frontier, at a time when basic civic freedoms are under attack, citizens' ability to freely speak, associate, assemble, is under attack in over 100 countries, according to the organization Civicus, which monitors this. This is happening, including in Europe, including in several OGP countries. As against this, we as a partnership have a responsibility to protect and enhance citizens' basic ability to freely speak, associate, assemble, and the ability of activists and journalists to serve as vital intermediaries and watchdogs for citizens. This is most beautifully, this nurturing of civic space is beautifully exemplified by South Korea, which is our next incoming chair of OGP. And so for this, I take you to Seoul. In Seoul, millions of citizens descended on Gwanghwamun Square in candlelight protests for 5 months to protest, to bring down, ultimately, the corrupt regime of President Park. So this was a citizen protest. But what was interesting is what happened after the protest. The new Moon government decided to leverage the same vibrant civic energy, inviting citizens back to Gwanghwamun Square to use the same vibrant energy and ask them freely associate and assemble and propose projects and policies that respond to your needs. This is inculcating civic energy. This resulted in 181,000 policy proposals by citizens, over 2,000 of which have been incorporated in policy. We need more Gwanghwamun squares in our world today. Estonia has been doing good practice in this area of civic engagement. You have a framework, a strategy for civil society development. You are funding new methods of civic engagement, and you've built capacity of civil society to participate in policy. Elsewhere in the world, at a time, look around this, look at the newspapers, at a time when journalists are under attack, they are being beaten, intimidated, imprisoned, and even killed in many parts of the world. Croatia is leveraging OGP to instead strengthen protection mechanisms for journalists. And Mongolia has leveraged OGP to commit to preserving and enhancing the independence of the media. But again, we need a lot more of this. So to strengthen collective action in this area, to protect civic freedoms and media freedoms, OGP has become a founding member of the OECD Observatory on Civic Space and the Forum on Information and Democracy. The fifth and last frontier, at a time when we are seeing new digital threats to democracy and the misuse of new technologies, such as the spread of disinformation, external meddling in elections, and threats to our individual privacy, a set of OGP countries are joining forces to advance new norms to tackle this. Already we are seeing nascent efforts to address this. For instance, Canada is using its OGP action plan to strengthen its electoral law, to improve the transparency with which voters are being targeted through online and traditional media. Finland is launching a major digital literacy campaign to empower students to spot and challenge disinformation. Australia is leveraging OGP to strengthen citizens' rights on how data about them is collected and used. France, Netherlands, and New Zealand are leveraging OGP to improve government's accountability to its citizens in the use of algorithms and artificial intelligence. Estonia, with its leadership of digital nations and of the EU on digital issues, has an excellent opportunity to join this group of OGP pioneers to shape norms for digital governance. So I've just taken you through an exhausting journey around the world across 5 frontiers of open government. But if you reflect on it, these 5 frontiers show a hopeful alternative of democratic renewal, of democratic reinvigoration at a time of unprecedented citizen threats to democracy. And at the center of this democratic renewal lies citizen empowerment, a picture of societies where citizens are empowered to shape and oversee policies and government every day, not just once in 4 or 5 years when we cast our vote, where citizen oversight and voice augments and complements the traditional role of bureaucracy, legislature, and oversight institutions, where participatory democracy augments and complements representative democracy to build citizen trust and deliver better results to citizens. But you know, the unfortunate reality is that all these examples I have shared with you today are too few and far between. While some OGP countries are implementing this, many others are not. We need to scale up these innovations so they become the new global norms. We need to transform our young and nascent open government partnership into a vibrant global force for reinvigorating democracy and serving as a countervailing force to the rise of authoritarianism that we see in our world today. Now, this is a formidable undertaking against very powerful political headwinds. So how do we forge stronger coalitions to make this happen, to make this a reality? At a global level, we are at a time when the traditional champions of democracy have retreated or regressed. Take the US. We need new world leaders such as South Korea, Argentina, Canada, France, Germany, who together lead OGP to, in fact, forge a stronger coalition to collectively push back. At a time when leaders like Hungary's Viktor Orban proudly proclaim the end of liberal democracy, we need more heads of states, ministers, mayors to speak out in democracy's defense, to showcase dividends from this reinvigoration of democracy and challenge head-on the claims of these strongmen that democracy is an impediment and dictatorship expedient in delivering results for citizens. Estonia can be a vital, bright spot in showcasing a hopeful way forward for this renewal of democracy. At the country level, we need to broaden awareness, coalitions, for open government across ministries, parliaments, judiciary, private sector, and a broader constellation of civil society than just the open government community, to include women's groups, LGBTQ activists, advocates for health and education. We need citizens from all walks of life, youth, all of you, to join the movement. If you're a concerned citizen, engage, including through the OGP process right here in your country. Demand open budgets, open contracts, end to anonymous companies. Ask to become the citizen monitors of public services. Ensure your voice is heard every day, not just once in every 4 or 5 years. If you're a reformer in government, open government to citizens. But above all, join hands with others, because you cannot win this battle alone. You see, I saw this in a very personal way growing up in Bihar, which was India's poorest and most corrupt state. My father was responsible for building roads in Bihar, and he fought against corruption in the award of road contracts. But he was a lonely warrior against a powerful political machinery. So I remember growing up seeing him being threatened, intimidated, and harassed. But he persisted, including later in life as a civil society activist. At age 80, though he was no lawyer, he fought a public interest litigation in court against corruption in a road project. He won the ruling, but later that very day, he fell and he died. He fought till the end, the two bookends of his life, from government reformer to civil society activist, straddling the two communities of OGP. But his was a lonely battle. That was a year before OGP was born. Now, 8 years since OGP, I circle back to Afghanistan, where we began our journey tonight. There, a young and reforming Minister for Public Works, Yamayari, decided to fight the mafia's capture of road contracts, exactly as my father attempted 8 years ago in Bihar in India. And Yama felt passionately that corruption was robbing precious resources that could be used to deliver for Afghans, like the ones that lined up in long lines and braved the bombs to cast their vote. But unlike my father's lonely journey, Yama was able to leverage OGP to forge partnerships to bolster him. So domestically, he joined forces with courageous civil society activists such as Syed Afzali and Nasser Timuri of Integrity Watch. Together they mobilized citizens. It's showing up there. Oh, there we go. It's showing up there. Okay. Together they mobilized citizens to monitor road contracts and report violations, saving $500 million in Afghanistan in 4.5 years. Tragically, last year, Yama's office got bombed, killing 28 of his staff and wounding 29. But Yama has continued his fight undeterred, bolstered by his courage, conviction, and coalitions. You see, bombs could not deter Afghans from casting their vote, and bombs could not deter reformers like Yama from persisting to deliver on the promise of that vote. It is this spirit of courageous reformers and activists fighting formidable odds to deliver, to open government to citizens, and of citizens persisting to have their voice in decisions that impact them. It is this collective spirit, this collective energy that powers OGP. So the challenge for all of us is, are we, each one of us, simply disconnected, lonely warriors like my father, fighting individual battles? And how can we become a joined-up force, multiplying collective strength to prevail over the powerful predators that capture the state to benefit themselves rather than the citizens? Now, this may seem like an impossible task, but in closing, let me share with you an example from nature that makes the impossible possible. So this is a phenomenon of starlings. Starlings are these small birds that are vulnerable to prey, and they are vulnerable to prey from the falcon. The falcon is much bigger and can swoop down and swallow them up. But at dusk time, hundreds and thousands of starlings make a formation in the sky that is known as murmurations for the sound it produces. And these murmurations have a function. Their function is to ward off the falcon. And lo and behold, you see the awesome power of the collective. You see, individual citizens are like starlings. Like the Afghans, they cast their vote, but beyond the ballot box, they feel helpless and hopeless in the face of the grand falcons of corruption, exclusion, authoritarianism. But we have seen in South Korea's Gwanghwamun Square, citizen murmurations bring down the very president. We have seen in Afghanistan, reformers and activists join forces to fight the mafia's capture of road contracts. You know, as the traditional champions of democracy have retreated and regressed, the falcon of authoritarianism has gained strength. But with 100 national and local governments and thousands of civil society, OGP represents a platform to forge ever stronger murmurations locally, nationally, and globally, to reinvigorate democracy beyond the ballot box, to serve as a countervailing force against authoritarianism, to serve as a bulwark, a bastion, a beacon for all those lonely warriors, to empower ordinary people to shape and oversee their government, to ensure it serves them rather than itself, to deliver on that precious, precious promise, a government for the people, of the people, by the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you for bringing in this hope to the chilly Estonia that we're having here now, and for the inspiring examples. Yeah, thank you for this collective effort here. So now I'm inviting Riina Raudne. Please take a seat. Riina Raudne is a social entrepreneur, health expert, and founder of the Health Estonia Foundation. And why we invited her here is because she's been participating or leading also several collaborative policymaking processes that have been really successful between the government and the civil society. And she has been there as a civil servant, but also as a civic activist. So she's seen it all. And Riina is really good in actually asking intriguing and difficult questions. So let's take this half an hour discussion, or let's see how long it goes, as setting the standard for later questions. Yeah.
Hello, good evening. First of all, thank you for your beautiful presentation, Sanjay.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Teele for inviting me here today, and I want to really thank you for this opportunity to be part of this conversation, and for the preparation that this evoked, which was truly educational and wonderful for me. As Teele mentioned, in my last 15 years of sort of civic service and public life, I've been on both sides of both on the civil society side and on the government side of leading public consultations. And so, since many people in the room here today are kind of professionals in this area, and we're not really contesting any of the core values of what you spoke about, I thought my questions could focus more on the deeper cuts on practicalities, like how, because it all sounds wonderful, and even though I haven't really followed the framework to a T, just living here in Estonia, working in the frameworks of what the Estonian civil society activists have built for us, I've, in many of my consultations, have been part of a lot of what I now understand as open government practices. So I might be a little bit, I might want to get deeper and more practical, and I want to wear the hat of, okay, help me out here. I'm an enthusiastic activist, and I want to understand how to leverage these frameworks very practically. The last thing you shared, the little video of starlings, it just got me thinking. I love this video, I've seen it before, and it's always just completely mesmerizing. But it just got me thinking about what allows murmurations to happen, this kind of beautiful self-organization. And it got me thinking about the shape of these times and the phase of the world we're in, and the ways in which we are different from starlings and we're similar to the starlings. And if these starlings are creating these formations, each one of them actually doesn't have that many choices. They move quite simply. They have to stay close to their neighbors, move in the same speed and direction, and try not to hit each other. But then on the system level, these beautiful patterns emerge and change. And I was just thinking that, wow, what would it take for us to be this close in harmony with each other? And have we ever been there? Are we on the way there? Because you could also imagine a situation where these, and that would be reminiscent of the current world, that, if starling flock would have little dronelets in there also trying to change the direction, or falcon would pretend to be some starlings, or there would be mirrors there, or little fake starlings, like how easy would it be for the starlings to continue to have these formations and this kind of self-organization? So my question to you is, what do you think of that? Do you think we've maybe led technologies to advance to the point where it really has disrupted our ability to self-organize in this way? Or do you still have hope that with leveraging OGP globally, we'll self-organize on a new level and even more powerfully than the starlings?
Wow, it's a very profound question. Thanks very much, Riina, first of all, for being here and for this question. So I think it is a complex world, as you are implying, and there are complexities that get in the way. There could be falcons pretending to be, there are fake NGOs, there are fake citizen movement, the infiltration of citizen movements that take place. The first thing I want to say is you're absolutely right, it's a complex world out there. But a wise man once said that there is simplicity on either side of complexity. And so if you look at it, what is the starling phenomenon about? They are unified by a shared purpose, which is to drive away the falcon. And they have egoless leadership. If you looked at this, the starlings, there is no leader. It is egoless leader. It's kind of like the Hong Kong protests right now. Hong Kong protests actually don't have a leader. They're unified in a common. So citizen movements have had this common denominator. They have been unified by their common purpose. Now, of course, citizen movements don't always happen. Gwanghwamun Square that I talked about is one citizen movement. But to answer your question, what if there aren't those unifying transversal movements where people just pick up and they join together? One of the things that I was doing in the World Bank and now we are doing in OGP is to work with reformers and activists to find that common purpose, to forge that murmuration. And we have looked and analyzed what it takes to forge that winning coalition. It requires hard work. The practical how requires hard work. I give an analogy if I could. My team knows this. So I love telling stories, as you can see. So I take you so there was a relay race happening in France. And there were several teams it was a 4x100 relay race competition. And there were several teams competing, but the French women's team, 4x100, had an impossible task of beating the US women's team. I'll come to your point on starlings, you'll see in just a moment. So the question was, why was it an impossible task for them? Exactly as you're implying, it's an impossible task. Because the US women's team in that year had the fastest women on the face of the planet. Their individual speeds were the fastest. And so here it is, the French team, 4x100, has to beat a team which is individually faster. Each one of them, the four of them, are faster than the French team. And so then I usually play the video, and you find that the French team actually beats the faster women's team. So the question is, how did they do it? What was their murmurations, which actually produced it? And then you look at it in slow motion, and you find, usually when you see a relay race, you say the last runner won the game. And when they interviewed the last runner from France, she said, it wasn't me, it was the way in which the third runner passed the baton to me that made me faster. And so what you show is that the third runner, in passing the baton, slows her individual speed and transfers the weight from the throat and the arms to propel the fourth runner forward. So the baton is faster, but the runner is slower. So this is the miracle of cooperation, or the miracle of collective action. And based on this, we have developed a methodology on the practicalities of it. What does it take to forge a winning murmuration or a winning relay race? There are four things you need. You need to unify people around one objective. What is the race we are going to win? We can't win too many races. So which race? Then we need to practice passing the baton. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? Where am I going to be occupying the space in the murmurations? Third, we need to build trust. We need to have trust so that we are part of the same winning team. When I go out there and ahead, I need to have trust you'll pass the baton to me. If I'm in a murmuration, we need to have trust in one another. And finally, you need egoless leadership. You need to role model the collective. So there is a method. We have a whole program that we are starting to implement, which I did in the World Bank Institute, where we work with teams to build the murmurations, to build a coalition, to build a collective. It's not easy. There is distrust, there is egos, but you have to try to build it. But the key is you find that common purpose. We have to fight the falcon. So.
Wow, beautiful answer. Thank you. I want to know more about it, and I'll find out. I'll Google it later.
I'll send you the link.
It's wonderful. The OGP framework got launched in 2011. The world was still a little bit different back then. And you've now had several years and all over the world opportunities to test it against reality. What have you learned about what's working and what's not working about the framework, and what have you had to tweak, and where are you going next with it?
Yeah, that's also, it's a very important question, a very big one. What we have found so far is that the machinery of OGP, the framework, as you say, is working, right? So the machinery it's churning along, right? So the machinery is working in the sense that you now have basically 100 members, 79 countries, 20 local governments, and with civil society, they're churning out the action plans. So the machinery of OGP is working, and that's no mean task. The fact that it's a machinery which is working and has produced 250 action plans, 4,000 commitments, and so on is itself an important accomplishment. So we've learned that the machinery is working, and we have someone from the IRM, the Independent Reporting Mechanism. They have published 350 reports. So it's a machinery that is working. But I'm a very impatient person, and we should all be impatient. We should not find comfort in numbers. We have to find comfort in impact. So when we look one step below at impact, the independent reporting mechanism assesses impact, potential impact. So there is accountability for that. We find roughly, depending upon how you measure it, there's 600 or 700 of these commitments which are judged by independent reporting mechanism to be transformative, to have changed the status quo. But that means several others are not transformative. So one thing we have learned is that there is a set of OGP countries and reformers in government and civil society that are implementing transformative reforms, but many others are not. By most standards, the 600, 700 is a good number. If you have 600, 700 reforms that are judged to be transformative, that would be good. We are very impatient. We are not satisfied with it, particularly because our world changed in the last few years. And our world changed in the last few years so that, there is too many attacks on democracy and openness. So this status quo is not good enough. And that is why I say these reforms are too few and far between. We need to scale this up. We need to have more transformation. That's one reason why I'm here in Estonia. I'm here in Estonia because we see Estonia as a bright spot. And we need the bright spots to shine in an environment which has become quite dark with the rise of populist authoritarian reason. So we need countries to be bright spots much more than they have been. We need to advance thematic norms like open contracts, like ending anonymous companies. So just to share with you, the machinery is working, but we need to raise ambition, and we need to ensure credible implementation. And that will require, coming back to your first question, picking ambitious reforms and forging murmurations to see them through, right? So those are some of the things we are learning.
Okay. I'm taking that in. I think I'm humbled by some of the processes that I've been a part of. Namely, I'm going to name two processes, and that on the one hand, they've really made me believe in collective impact. And exactly the kind of process that, you know, you have a wide-reaching consultation, and you develop some sort of strategy or paper that, you know, really have had a lot of deliberation. But I've also seen what it takes from all parties, and I've seen that, you know, what civil society wants or what seems to serve citizens isn't always, you know, universally clear to said citizens or these civil society partners, and I think many of the examples you brought were from countries with, you know, a strongman with a strongman government, or you know, and you referred that playbook, but then there's also situations where the private sector can sort of forge regulatory capture by using their own playbooks and very often mimicking very professionally the sort of civil society participating in public consultations process. So I'm wondering what you've learned about it from around the world. I noticed, by the way, that you did not take us to the US. I wondered why, and again, like I have a public health background, so I've been very, very keenly over the years observing some of the public health fights on, you know, that cause the industrial epidemics that, you know, you could say obesities or tobacco or alcohol or the school shootings or things like that. And I wonder whether or how the OGP framework could help in an ambiguous situation like that, where you could really say that there are competing values at stake. You know, somebody might say, okay, you know, we need to save more lives. Some other people might say, but what about free speech for our alcohol advertising? Or what about, you know, freedom of choice for people buying as much sugary foods as they want? How should we lead these consultations so that they don't lead us astray, and that at the end of the day, the, you know, who can afford more speech can win?
Yeah.
Am I clear?
Yeah, definitely. There are different aspects of what you're mentioning. Let me just unpack a few the way I hear it. One aspect is that you have civil society which is more or less authentic, and the civil society space can itself be captured by the private interests. And so there is that aspect. One thing we have, it's definitely a risk you can see. I can tell you that one thing I saw, I'll give you an example, a story. When I went to Nigeria, it was President Buhari had just announced that Nigeria would join OGP. So I go into Nigeria, and there's this massive room where there are 300 civil society organizations. And there it was the government rather than the private sector. We call them gongos, right? Gongos are government NGOs. So they had said these would be the leaders of the civil society movement. So they had kind of appointed civil society leaders. And I don't know if you've seen Nigerian civil society. It's feisty. It's really feisty, and it's one of the strongest I've seen. Within the 3 days that I was there, they had ousted the gongos, and they'd inserted really fiery civil society leaders who are forces to reckon with. I was just there 2 weeks ago. After that trip, I went back again. And so there is, not always, but there is a process of self-democratically, they know who's real and who's not. And so they actually, it was democracy in action. They ousted the gongos. The gongos are nowhere to be seen. and the 3 civil society leaders who head OGP Nigeria are forces to reckon with. They are quite tough on government, and government reformers like them because they push them to do more things, right? So it doesn't always work, but Riina, what I'm just saying is that there is in the process is embedded a piece of sifting. The other thing that happens is that the goal of the action plan is transparency, participation, responsiveness. And usually the private sector captured CSOs will want the opposite of that, right? So the process and the action plan also helps like a filter. Obesity you talked about. Interestingly, in Mexico, for the OGP process, they did roundtables to find out what should be open government priorities. Now, if you think of open government priorities, the last thing you would think of is obesity. But in Mexico, in the roundtables, what came out is one of their top priorities was obesity. And at first we were saying, what? Why? How did obesity? And it turns out in Mexico that this is quite an important issue because exactly to your point, the soft drink oligarchy wanted to keep away information. I don't know all the details, but they wanted to withhold information about the health risks of these soft drinks. And it became clear that the open data disclosure piece was an important part of the solution. And you know what has also been interesting is that the civil society that were campaigning for this were ultimately subject to surveillance by the powerful sources, and it led to civil society walking out of the government OGP process, which I think is a sign of success because they said we were being surveilled upon, right? So I'm just saying that there was this, so there are these processes which actually help surface the issues. One last point, when you were talking about the gray issues, which don't have a clear resolution, I actually think the kind of work that Estonia has done through citizen assemblies are in fact because a lot of issues today, to your first point, are complex. They don't have black and white solutions. I'll give you another example. In the context of Brexit in the UK, they convened citizen assemblies, and because there wasn't a clear roadmap, and we know still today it's such a divided issue, but they got representatives of different positions, and they convened them in citizen assemblies, and they fought it out for a period of time. So this is deliberative, and then they did come up with some recommendations, which they presented to Parliament. God knows what happened because it's clear as mud still. But the point is that there is a way to discipline, have a disciplined dialogue. One last point, sorry, because there was an earlier point you made, which is a really important one, Riina, which is that there are areas where the citizen may not be that well informed, and I hadn't answered that. So there is a very good expert on deliberative democracy in Canada. I can share with you his information. One of the things he does is he showcases examples of complex policy issues like housing reform, where the citizens may not know the intricacies of real estate taxes and so on. But what they did is they created deliberative mechanisms where they brought in experts who helped distill complex issues into some simpler areas. Then they brought in citizens to vote on these areas. When they came in, they again brought in the experts to untangle some of the things. This is what I meant about simplicity on either side of complexity. You bring in experts to distill things in a way that citizens can understand. But I do believe that this combination on online, offline, which you've done through Ravakogu, and this combination of experts and citizens is a way to get to this, right? And there are clearly limits. Citizens will not have a view on complex tax issues. They shouldn't. They shouldn't be the ones voting on this form of taxation or whatever. So it's a question of which ones you crowdsource and which ones you do on your own. I don't know if that addresses the point.
It does, yes. Thank you.
Okay.
I think we're... Okay. I am truly curious about whether you could take us to the United States.
Oh.
Whether there's any hope there.
Oh God.
Oh no.
So, is this being televised? So, right. Okay, so God. Okay, let's see. What should I say?
Or
No, I can tell you.
If a real hopeful story isn't forthcoming, how would you leverage OGP in a thorny issue?
I won't duck the question, so I'll tell you in a way that I don't get into serious trouble. US was the founder, and a lot of the growth of OGP took place because the US, UK, Norway, all the founders were very enthusiastic. It's very interesting if you look at the founders of OGP, the 8 countries, and you see what has happened to some of them. They've actually gone in a quite different direction. US, Brazil, Mexico.
Is that a sign?
No, it's not a sign. I will say, though, that some of the underlying sources of citizen discontent which brought populist leaders to power can be addressed in principle through open government approaches, because citizen discontent comes from feeling disempowered from government. And so what I was sharing, the first frontier was, can you empower citizens to get to their discontent, right? This is the aggrieved majorities, right? The mainstream aggrieved majority. Anyway, so a lot of these countries have moved on. Now, in the US, they were the founders, they were on the steering committee. It turned out that the year I joined in 2016, which was also an important election year, US had moved off the steering committee. So, and there are some concerns, genuine concerns about the action plan in the US and the OGP action plan, and whether it's really, whether it's really pursuing much. But so far, it's probably just chugging along without the US playing much of a role either way.
But I'm just curious, on either on the local level or on the federal level, during the Obama years, of which there were several between when the OGP was formed and before Obama era ended, were there practical small examples?
Yes. One of the examples from the US, which was quite good, was on the petition system. It's called We the People or something. There's a petition system which was quite good. At the and we have local government OGP local pioneers. City of Austin is one of them. It's a very moving example of the city of Austin. What they did is they wanted to empower the homeless. And imagine this is about that second frontier I talked about, empowering the disenfranchised. So City of Austin was developing a homelessness program, and they crowdsourced pain points from the homeless and the communities affected, and they crowdsourced solutions from them. So this is a very moving example that the homeless that most people discard and certainly don't feel that they have a view, open government was opening to them in that way. So, and US had also done some stuff on fiscal disclosure and so on. So US was doing some things which were interesting, not in the last action plan. But I do want to give you an example of Duterte in the Philippines. So the Philippines, when you hear of Duterte, you do not associate open government. But what is interesting is that whatever one views about the drug war and the human rights issues in the Philippines, underneath Duterte, there are courageous reformers and activists in the Philippines that are doing very, very interesting things with OGP, right? So I was just looking at it. They have, one of the issues in the Philippines is the delivery of educational materials in the most remote areas of the Philippines. And so what they have done is, their OGP commitment is to use satellite imagery to track the implementation of textbooks, and citizen empowerment. So it's empowering communities and aided by satellite technology. These are people, these are reformers under the radar screen, under the radar, doing innovative open government reform. So this is an important point for OGP, which is that governments are not monolithic entities. Even when you think of a Brazil or a Mexico or a US or a Philippines, whatever you think of the head of state, there are reformers underneath who are trying to make change happen, and OGP empowers them to make change happen. I have learned over a period of time, in 33 years of my service in World Bank, and that governments are not monolithic entities. Like my father, there are reformers fighting a very corrupt system, and that's part of the simplicity of complexity. There are people who are fighting. If you have a platform which empowers them and they join forces with civil society, which is trying to make change happen, you have a powerful combustion, a positive combustion that makes change happen despite an overarching system which is not enabling. And that's many ways the real politic of reform. It's not always like Armenia today. Armenia, I was just there a couple of weeks ago. Pashinyan, there's a velvet revolution. There's a complete alignment. The prime minister was a journalist. He wants to open government. His cabinet is very coming from civil society and so on. One scenario is you have a complete alignment. Civil society likes the government because they were there. But there are other constellations where the scenario is not that bright, but you can still empower change agents to make change happen.
Thank you.
Riina, sorry. Are there any questions in the audience? Anyone? Raise your hand. There is one, yeah. And you can ask in Estonian as well. Eesti keeles võib ka küsida.
Hi, Sanjay. Thank you very much for coming and for the voyage through which you've taken us. While I was listening to you, I was actually wondering something similar as Riina's first question, in the fact about technology disrupting our ability to unite. And the reflection I had was rather, you've talked about empowering citizens, and I'm mostly referring to Western European countries which are set to have more established democracies. But what if there's no will to use the mechanisms of democracy? If we have taken democracy for granted, and no matter how many mechanisms of petition to the government you make, how many tools you give to citizens, there's simply no interest. Because I was also following the examples you brought, Spain, Germany, even Estonia, and these three countries, Spain in recent elections had the rise of the far right.
That's right.
Estonia has its own far right party, Germany is particularly worried as well.
Yes.
So, and then I also noticed you mentioned pledges, you asked for more ministers, more heads of states, more commitments, but all this might be very top-down rather than grassroots and actually hitting a big segment of population, leaving me a certain picture of a very committed minority to work for deepening democracy, while somehow heedless majority is simply voting against it. What do you think of this?
Can you repeat the last part of what you said?
Right, so the final picture that, so it works better if it's good. Right, I figured that out now. No, the last picture I was having in my head was about a very committed minority of democracy activists bringing more mechanisms to deepen the reach of democracy to everyone, and then a somehow heedless majority simply voting against it. Are we just talking to ourselves? Should we go more grassroots, maybe? Or should we need more democracy literacy, even in the places where we're taking it for granted?
Yeah. Very profound question.
Sorry.
I think if we think of drivers of change, in different contexts, you have to opportunistically come up with different drivers of change. So there is the Armenia, which I was just mentioning, there's the Armenia kind of situation where there's a velvet revolution, there's a complete alignment, so there's a committed leadership to your first point, and they want to make change happen. And so there is an alignment. Civil society wants something, the government is also oriented that way. Now, in other contexts, if the majority is, the question is who's not interested? Is it the head of state, or is it the ruling party which reflects the majority which is not interested? Yeah, that's a real challenge. I mean, open government cannot solve the problem of a power imbalance, of a power structure which from head to toe is looking to go right. First of all, we try not to think of right and left. We try to think of open versus closed. So there could be a real challenge that you have an alignment of the right, of intolerance, let's say, from the bottom to the top. I happen to think that if you look here just at the US, for instance, here I'll come back to the US, you have a certain percentage of the population which may be very much in the intolerant category, but there's also a lot of silent majority which is not necessarily in that camp. And so the question is, how do you engage them? How do you empower them? And I do believe that the open government movement has not sufficiently engaged the silent majorities as much, right? It has not developed mechanisms to engage the mainstream majorities as much. It has the tools to do so, but it hasn't fully done so. But I think the broader challenge of what you're mentioning is that if you don't have the permitting conditions, it may be very hard to make change happen. I agree with that. There is no, you do need the other driver of change, which is what you're implying, is to mobilize bottom-up pressure. And that's what we'll have to do. But I don't know if that fully answers your question.
Yeah, sorry, no, it does partly. My main worry is on how to create a sort of a rebirth of interest in democracy among the people who are not interested in using all these new mechanisms on which you're working, but are in turn activated by the messages of closed messages.
So one part of the solution is open local government. Right, so people are interested in local issues, and that's why I'm very interested in what's happening in Estonia at the municipal level, where there have been innovations in embedding open government approaches at the local level, and that is one way to build interest at a local level where citizens are interested in whether schools and healthcare and sanitation are delivering services to them. If they are being empowered to give feedback on these services and for government to be responding, that's one way to build interest in things which matter to them, right? So that is one approach of this, is to go more local in the first instance and to rebuild that interest on things that matter to them. But I don't know if others have some thoughts on this.
Anybody? Don't be shy, please.
So maybe it's also to this question, like I thought that in Brexit, when this was a referendum which was often perceived, or many people argued that actually it wasn't so much about whether to stay in the EU or to exit, rather to if they're still supporting the current government or not. And so what is your idea, like how could they have made it open as a government to the people without having a decision which is that severe eventually? And also maybe as part B of the question, how is open government maybe possible, and also including the population more in decision making, when, for example, again, Brexit, the people often didn't even know what the consequences would entail. So often people were asked well, what does it mean for you? And they literally did not know what it entailed for them. So I see that there's like a little bit of a danger. Oh, yeah. What is your take on that, perhaps?
I entirely agree. If you ask people, this goes back to Rina's question. If you ask people to deliberate on things they don't know about, in the case of Brexit, there were lots of costs. There were people promising all kinds of things that Brexit would deliver, where the costs were not at all transparent. And so people were voting on things based on very knee-jerk emotional issues. Xenophobia played a lot of, this whole fear of being swept by migrants, and the immigration issue is a very important emotive issue, which has driven a number of these, whether referenda or electoral results. And clearly, subjecting something as complex as Brexit to a yes or no referendum without adequate information and expertise is not necessarily. And that's why I do think that the Citizen Assembly Brexit example I was giving is a potentially good way forward, which is that you actually have more considered deliberative processes, which with expertise, with time, with focus, thrash out the costs and benefits, which then are subjected, if you have to subject it to some kind of a vote. As it turns out, in the UK, the last few years have demonstrated some of the costs and benefits of this still, although it's still imperfect in that sense. So I do think citizen voting per se is not a panacea if it is on issues which are technical and ill-informed. Usually, in the examples I was giving, the examples are on things which impact citizens' lives, which they experience, and they can, through their experience, report on. Is the road being built? That's the example on local government. Is the road being built in this area which the government committed to? Am I getting the health or education service that but if you start asking them about the design of the pension system or about healthcare and which of the systems of healthcare financing and health insurance is better, those are fairly technical issues. And it doesn't lend itself to a yay-nay binary voting mechanism. So citizen empowerment has its limits if it's put, if it's trying to be very facile in what we are trying to ask citizens to do. You need informed decision-making. And also, some things are not things you want to subject to a yay-nay vote. That's not the way to make policy.
So last chance for last question.
Hello, thank you
Hi.
for the presentation. I'm Annette from Citizen OS, which is e-democracy platform. And you mentioned before that you're really, you would like to see Estonia as a pioneer of digital governance. So my question for you is that how do you see where this digital governance is heading in the world? In Estonia, we have quite a lot of examples of good examples how it might work. But for example, we are now also collaborating with Indonesia, for example, where the willingness on the civil society level is very high. They would really like to participate. They would like to be engaged and be involved. But on the other hand, on the governance, it's really corrupted there. And of course, they don't want to use any technology, for involving people because, it gets transparent and people will see how corrupted this government actually is. So what do you think? What is the future?
So there are two aspects. One is digital for governance, and the other one is governance of digital, right? So I just want to mention two things. So one is on digital for governance. A lot of the examples I gave are examples where digital technology empowers citizens to track and monitor government, right? So the Ukraine ProZorro, DoZorro example is an example where citizens have monitored the implementation of contracts. So it's digital technology which is making transparent to citizens what is happening with the contracts. They are empowered to report on that, and there undoubtedly there'll be resistance from some parts of government or some of the powerful elite who benefit from the corrupt system. I'll give you another example of digital for governance, which is a really powerful one. So in Nigeria, in Kaduna, which is one of the provinces, they did an audit and they found that a health clinic, which was promised to the citizens, paid for the budget, only existed on paper. Right? So it was a ghost clinic, right? And we have this problem of ghost clinics. But Nigeria is very tech savvy, right? So what they did is the director of the budget, his name is Muhammad Abdullahi. He said, this cannot stand. I'm paying for these things through my budget, but they're just stealing the money away. So he decided to talk about tech. He gave a smartphone to all of his staff, and he said, you go and take pictures of all the projects we are paying for, so we can assess if in fact these projects exist. So that was using technology. The problem was Kaduna is a very large province. And so these handful of staff just couldn't go and photograph all these facilities. So then they developed an app which is called Citizen Feeds. And what Citizen Feeds does is that any citizen can download the app. And when they download the app, they find all the projects paid by the budget within a 2-kilometer radius. So this is very powerful open data by government. It discloses all the projects within your geocoded in a 2-kilometer radius of all the health clinics and roads. So that's step one. Step two, the citizen can take a picture whether the road exists, whether the health clinic exists, or the condition of the health clinic. If it's leaking, they gave the money to and so this picture or the feedback goes directly to the governor's office, the executive branch, and the state legislature simultaneously. It's hardwired in the technology. What does that do? It changes the game. The government is compelled to respond. The parliamentarians, the legislature has this. So in 2 years, Kaduna reports a record completion of 200 health clinics, 400 schools. And we did a study. I did a little TED-like talk on this. There is a 20% reduction in maternal mortality in remote areas from the renovation of this health clinic, right? So this is an example of tech for governance, right? The other aspect I was mentioning is governance of tech, right? So clearly what we are seeing is technology itself needs to be governed because we are seeing the spread of disinformation, right? Threats to our individual primacy. We have seen election meddling and so on. So, and we are seeing algorithms which we need to know how the algorithm is being used. Now, this is an area which I'm suggesting as well. So the tech for governance is an area which is mushrooming. All the examples I gave, if you look at it, in the end, they're tech for governance. They're all tech related, right? But the governance of tech is a more nascent, newer area where we are recognizing these negative impacts of unfettered technology. And there we are seeing that a set of OGP countries are starting to shape some norms to deal with this issue. It's very, very new. So that's where I was talking, you're talking about regulating online political ads, which are used to target us and make sure and manipulate public opinion. Canada is using OGP to strengthen electoral law, to improve transparency on how voters are being targeted through online and traditional ads. Australia is improving citizens' rights on how the information about them is collected and used. France, Netherlands, New Zealand are improving transparency on algorithms so that citizens are empowered. So in this case, citizens need to have a voice in the governance of tech. And it is in this area, I'm sure Estonia is doing work in this area. I'm suggesting only that there is an OGP pioneer group of these countries. I'm asking Estonia to join that group. And because I really do see Estonia as one of the leaders of digital technology, of digital nations, that initiative, and in the EU, it's been one of the leaders on technology. It can actually join and shape these norms and be a vanguard, a leader in this space. So I don't know if this answers your question. Okay.
Thank you, Sanjay. You really are a treasure box of inspiring examples. This was really helpful, and you have a long visit still ahead. Tomorrow you will visit the Secretary of State of Estonia and the Commission, actually like safeguarding open government in Estonia. And you met the minister today already. How did it go? Just briefly.
It was a great meeting. It was a great meeting. We discussed open local government, both the area of participatory budgeting, but also mobilizing citizen feedback on service delivery and responding to them. And we also discussed beneficial ownership transparency, and we discussed open contracting. It was a great meeting.
A lot of complex terms.
Yeah. Ending anonymous companies and opening all contracts to citizens, if that helps.
Anyway, we can continue the discussion over some snacks and coffee.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We have some small gifts for you, presented by Alari from the non-government organizations.
Oh my God.
Practical.
Oh,
Very
thank you.
practical.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to take an opportunity to thank you very much, Tilida, to the Civil Society Roundtable, and to this beautiful museum for hosting this, and to Riina for very thoughtful, very, very thoughtful questions. And to all of you, I just can't believe you're still sitting here. And you haven't kind of fallen asleep. I was looking, is someone falling asleep? What should I do? Should I sing or dance or something? No, but thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Heartfelt thanks.
Thank you.